Alright, so this is part 2 of Off-Road Shifter Kart. Now, before we mount the engine in the frame, I think let's first get most of the steering installed, because remember, the steering shaft is going to have to go underneath the engine, pretty much like that, and that's pretty much the only way that I can figure out how to get the steering to work, with the engine right here. So let's get the steering installed, or at least most of the steering, get the tie rods installed, and that will determine exactly where we can put the engine. Alright, so I think the steering ratios are not really that great. I think I made this part a little too long. So I think the steering would work fine at slow speeds, but for a vehicle like this, for high speed, if I left the steering like this, it would make it to where, you know, even the slightest movement of the steering wheel, the vehicle will be trying to dart, you know, all over the place. So you want to make it to where you have to turn the wheel, you know, a lot to turn the tires a little bit. That makes a fast vehicle a lot more stable at high speed. So let me shorten this a little bit more. It's also going to make it to where I can lower this a little bit more to get the engine a little bit lower. Also, check it out, it doesn't have any bump steer. Look at that. Check it out. Steering is pretty much finished, or at least this part of the steering is finished. Now, Because I mounted this part of the tie rods in the exact same line as the pivot point for the suspension, this thing basically has 0 bump steer. I will admit it does have some bump steer when I turn it full lock in either direction and move it up and down. Then it has a little bit of bump steer, but when it's mostly facing forward, it has 0 bump steer, which is, I think that's good enough. Now, next thing is we can now mount the engine in the frame. Yeah, I know it looks a little weird having the engine mounts extremely long, but that's just kind of how I had to do it right now. Once I add more of the frame on this thing, I'll figure out ways to connect the frame to these to try and make it a little bit stronger. Alright, next thing is let's start working on installing the jack shaft. Now, this is the gearing that I'm kind of choosing for this thing. I'm kind of just guessing at what the gearing should be, and we can always change it later on if we need to. Now, this is a sprocket for the rear axle. Now this is a 24-2 sprocket, and it's right now bored out to 1 inch. We need 1.25 inches, and I thought of cutting the weld out and replacing this hub with one that with a hub that is 1.25 inches. But I think it'd be a lot easier just to chuck this in the lathe, bore it out to 1.25 inches, and then I'll re-key this. For these, we need to machine these, so therefore they fit on these hubs, and then we'll weld them in place. And we also can't forget about brakes for the rear. So I have this brake disc. We just need to machine. Weld something onto here and then machine it, so therefore the brake disc gets bolted onto the hub, and then we can start working on actually installing the jack shaft. Alright, so I've been staring at this thing for a couple hours now, trying to figure out how in the world I'm doing the rear suspension. Now, my original plan was going to be using 4-link suspension, but now that I'm kind of looking at it, 4-link suspension wouldn't work because the seat is really low. To be able to make 4-link suspension work, I'd have to lift the seat about 4 or 5 inches higher, and I just kind of don't want to do that. It would make the center of gravity higher, make me sit higher in the frame and everything. So now, after staring at this, I kind of think I have an idea for a new kind of rear suspension. I haven't really seen it done before, and I'm not sure if it'll work, honestly, but in my head it should work. It'll still make it to where, because I want the rear suspension to articulate side to side a little bit, and not just move up and down. It makes it to where it's, in really rough terrain, makes it a little bit smoother. So now, all we have to do is add more frame and build the frame out to where it'll support this bearing. I think the jack shaft's going to be good right about here. We need to add parts of the frame that go from here. It'll support this bearing and also make it to where we can add a hind joint right about there, and then the same thing on the other side. Alright, so here is how the 2-link rear suspension is basically going to work. Basically, we just need to connect these 3 bearings together with tubing on this side and on this side, and then we'll flip it up, so therefore it's facing forward, and we need to mount a hind joint on this side, going from here up to that hind joint, but we are not mounting a hind joint on this side. We are having a piece of tubing that is hard mounted to the tubing that's connecting the bearings together, and also another piece of tubing going from here to here to triangulate it to make it stronger, and simply going up to that hind joint. Now, in theory, that should make it to where the rear suspension can still move up and down and articulate side to side a little bit, but can't move side to side this way. In theory, it seems to work in my head. I'm pretty sure this will work. I'm just not 100% sure. I've also been Googling 2-link suspension, and I can't really seem to find any documentation or videos or pictures of somebody else doing this kind of rear suspension. That kind of has me wondering, maybe nobody's done it because it doesn't work. I don't know. So we're going to try it. We're going to see if it works. If it doesn't work, I can always try a different type of rear suspension. And the reason I'm not doing 4-link is because 4-link is going to have tubing going from here to here and here to here, and that's going to be in the way of the seat. I'm trying to make it to where I can mount the seat as low as possible, but still have a good amount of suspension travel. That way, that's why this type of suspension can go around the seat. Yeah, we'll build it, we'll test it, we'll see if it works, and if it doesn't work, we'll figure out something else to do. So check it out. So it seems to be working. It can move up and down, it can articulate side to side, but most importantly, it can't move side to side because this is hard mounted. This is basically just acting like one piece of a trailing arm, and then this is just keeping it from moving. I mean, because if you check this out. So if you remove this, it can do this, but it can still articulate. So if you just connect this to this, it now locks it to where it can still move up and down, still articulate side to side, but can't move side to side. So it seems to be working, but this is the reason why I wanted to do this type, is because this goes around the seat, not underneath it, and it still allows for a decent amount of suspension travel. So actually right now, this tube hits this right here, but once I get the seat installed, I'll cut these a little bit shorter and bend them up around the seat, so once I do that, that shouldn't be an issue. But yeah, it seems to be working, which is awesome. Now, one thing I will admit this does is it does, when I pick up one side, it does move in that direction. So I'm almost wondering, does this suspension style have like any weird rear bump steer issues or any like high-speed wobble issue? I don't know. Because I'm trying to think, does the Grave Ninja do this? When I pick up one end, whoa, frame's falling off. So, like I said before, I did do about 45 minutes of research trying to see, can I find any pictures, any videos, any documentation on this type of rear suspension. To not only try to figure out, does it have a name, but mainly figure out, has it been done before and will it work? Because it does have that kind of weird thing where if I pick up one of the rear tires, the frame kind of moves to one side a little bit, which kind of makes me think that could possibly end up being an issue of rear bump steer. If it's one of the rear tires moves up and it moves the frame to the side, that's bump steer, or a type of bump steer. So, but I'm trying to think, does 4-link suspension do the same thing? Because that's, I don't know, maybe the geometry is different with 4-link suspension where it doesn't do it. I was almost thinking of pulling out the mini rock crawler project, and because that has 4-link rear suspension, and I'm trying to articulate the rear suspension, kind of see, does it move the frame to one side? Does it do the same thing? But that project's kind of buried right now, and I don't really want to spend about 30-45 minutes unburying that thing. So I guess it's gonna kind of be a thing of just, we'll test it, see if it works. If it doesn't work, we can always try a different suspension. But I don't think it's going to be that bad, because the rear suspension is not going to be it's not a rock crawler. It's not going to be doing this as we're driving it. It's mainly just going to be a little bit where this, because I was pondering of just making it to where the rear axle can only move up and down, but then with really uneven terrain, it just makes the whole frame do this, and it makes a lot more smooth of a ride if you can have it to where the rear suspension can articulate side to side. So, but it's not going to be moving that much, and I do know this thing's probably going to be really fast. It's a shifter kart, it's supposed to be fast. I don't want to have any high-speed wobble issues or weird rear bump steer issues. I want this thing to be really stable at high speed. So, anyway, we got a decent amount of work done in this video. We got the jack shaft installed, we got the motor installed, we got most of the steering installed, rear suspensions installed. Next video, we get to install the seat. We need to figure out how we're doing the rear shocks, how we're mounting the top of the rear shocks, the top of the front shocks. We need to build more of the tubing to connect everything together. We need to figure out where the gas tank's going, where the steering wheel's going, where's the radiator going on this thing. So yeah, these projects kind of get complicated real fast, especially when I'm trying to build it as small and compact as possible. But I do think this project is going to be pretty awesome once it is finished. But anyway, guess that's it for this video. Thank y'all for watching. I'll see ya in the next video.